Hello, I'm Jean Pete, and I welcome you back to our show, Better Living. Better Living is brought to you by the Homestead Hope Foundation and is sponsored by Homestead Hospice, where commitment to education and premier hospice care helps patients and families through life's most important journey.
Thanks for joining us again today. I'm Jean Pete, and again, I'm here with Mike King as my co-host. Michael King is a licensed master of social work. Did I get that right, Mike?
You got it right, Jeannie.
Okay, and we have brought back guests you may be familiar with, Lisa Meeks and Brandy Hackett with Senior Care Options. If you have listened to past shows, you will remember that they are certified professional geriatric care managers. And as professional geriatric care managers, there is a myriad of topics that they are experienced in. So I've asked them to come back and talk about the holidays again for you and grief and how you can cope with grief and loss of a loved one, and hopefully this show will help you get through this holiday season if you are grieving the loss of a loved one. So Lisa, Brandy, thank you for coming back to the show with us.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
I always love having you, but let's start again by explaining what exactly is a geriatric care manager.
I like to tell people that having a geriatric care manager is a little bit like having an aging or a healthcare advisor or a medical advisor, just like you would have an attorney for legal advisement or financial planner for financial advisement, that this is an area that's complicated and vast, and if you don't have somebody guiding you who really knows what's going on and who can be objective and on your side, it's really just daunting.
It is daunting, and it can be the difference between, honestly, not to get dramatic, life and death,
yes,
or comfort and pain, and
yep.
It can be a huge difference financially just having someone guide you through the healthcare system today, which is ever-changing and ever more confusing, in my opinion.
Yes, it is.
So very glad to have you back. Brandy, is there anything that you wanted to add to some of the things that you do as a geriatric care manager with a licensed Master of Social Work degree?
Well, I think it's very important with our team that, we are vested in this population. Most of us bring years and years of experience to working with families, and I know that a lot of what I've seen and a lot of what I dealt with really helps me best guide my clients. And the beautiful part about having a team of us is that it's like having, for us, 6 brains in one. And I think a lot of times having that ability to lean on each other professionally, because as you know, we all care for seniors for our own specific needs, and we're vested for different reasons, and most of the time we've experienced things from very different angles. So having different perspectives on that is very, very helpful because, it's nice to have other people to bounce things off of.
Wonderful. So today we're going to talk about grief and loss during the holidays. It can be such a joyous time of year, and there's lots of celebrating, and we're already hearing the music and seeing the decorations in the shops as we're out and about. But it can also be a very, very difficult time for anyone that is grieving or has suffered a loss, whether that's recent or not. And so I do want to talk about the different stages of grief and how the holidays can affect you, whether it's recognized or unrecognized by you. So I'm going to just kind of throw it out there. Michael, I know you're also a master of social work, so can we talk about the different stages of grief first, and then we'll get into the holidays and how people can get through them?
Mike, do you want to?
Yeah, well, I'd like to focus on loss. We always focus on the grief and the stages of grief, but I think it's important that someone understands what they're experiencing, which is the loss. Even while the patient remains in their home, they're losing their companion. They're losing somebody that they knew. They're losing their future. And this causes a lot of anger, which is one of the stages of grief. It causes a lot of depression comes in. So as a professional, we need to step in and help the loved one to understand that it's normal to experience these feelings of loss. I know with couples, when the wife starts to not be able to. She forgets the chili on the stove and it burns. It's a sudden little recognition that person's not the same person that you had, and that person's gone. And this is where the grief starts. This is where
we could even be grieving someone who's living, like what you're talking about is
yes.
grieving a loved one with some form of dementia like Alzheimer's, even though your loved one is still with you. And people who may be going through the holidays with you may not understand your sense of loss, even though that physical person is still right there with you.
And I think it's important that we help them to understand that loss, because this is where the depression, the anger, the frustration comes in, and they don't know what's going on either, and they're lost for knowledge. And I think it's so important that we step in and educate and acknowledge the fact of the losses that they're experiencing. It might be they're sleeping in late, or forgetting to put their pajamas on. Little things that they're recognizing, but saying, was that me, or is what's going on here? It starts to play a mind trip on them, and with that comes the emotional roller coaster. Mm-hmm. And some days it's good. Then you start doubting yourself, like, well, maybe I was just overcautious there, and maybe it's my fault. And you start blaming yourself, which is one of the stages of grief. So we need to step in and recognize what that loss is and how it's affecting us at different levels, and to confirm within ourselves this is happening and that it's for real, and how we can deal with it. And kind of give yourself
a break.
Yes.
It's okay.
Well, and I think we're used to, and no one's really comfortable with, I've found, but a lot of people are very used to what I call the graveside support or the funeral home support. So they're used to the pat on the back, I'm here for you, I'm really sorry for your loss. They're more comfortable with supporting the loss through death. But I think it's vitally important to recognize that loss, like we've talked about a lot of things, is such a continuum. And just because you've had your 3-day bereavement leave does not mean that in 3 years or 3 decades that things might surface. I know this week was actually the Fetal Loss Awareness Week. And I know that there's a lot of people that are dealing with that type of loss, and it's very hard because things can surface and things can trigger where, again, somebody can feel very, very alone in how they're grieving throughout the entire process.
And also for the person with dementia, it's not an overnight change that happens, but they start recognizing and they start doubting and they start questioning themselves, mm-hmm. and they don't feel comfortable in talking about it because they doubt themselves. And this is where a lot of the stages of grief start. With the anger and the frustration and the lack of knowledge. And as professionals, I feel it's very important that we step in through the medical doctors to make them aware that we're there as a support, and get the family support, get the patient support as soon as possible so that they can understand what is happening to them.
And part of what we want to do is move them through the stages of grief so they get to the acceptance stage. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was really the spearhead in the 70s on writing about end of life and sort of giving name to these 5 stages. For those of you who are not familiar or not master's level social work, they are denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and finally acceptance. So part of the use of having these medical professionals is to help support and guide people through the process so they can get to their acceptance.
And we don't want them to suppress any of these emotions, any of these feelings.
Feel them.
We want to bring it out. Talk is a good therapy, and if we can get them to that point of talking about it, they will not feel alone. And I think that's our goal as professionals, to recognize these changes. And it's going to be an up, it's going to be a down, and it's going to change from day to day. It's like a roller coaster, like Brandy had said earlier.
Well, and I think, too, that, when you think of holidays, if you really sit down and say, what are the holidays for me? It's typically good food, time with family, and lots of joy. You know, you want to see the joy in your child's face as they think that Santa's brought them that gift down the chimney. I mean, it's a lot of pleasure, a lot of very hedonistic things that are surrounded in the holidays. And, you know, people are just sort of nicer and things are just happier, and it's Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. And, you know, you don't say things that are just like, oh, I hope you have a depressing holiday. You know, that's not. And a lot of the feelings of grief and loss are so vastly on the other end of that spectrum that it's such a swing for people. So they can be in such a moment of joy when they're there with their grandchildren and yet feel such deep sorrow over different losses. And so that can be such a hard place to be, because you feel like you're almost betraying the other for feeling what's there.
And they can feel lonely even in a crowd, or the entire family's there. And if they're losing their partner, they can feel an immense loneliness.
And,
So
and
what
you
can
feel
we
like
do
you're
to help those people while still enjoying? Because now I'm putting myself in the role of the person that's coming with the children and wanting to enjoy it, but also not wanting to respect the person that has suffered the loss, but balancing it, that's very difficult. So you just put it out there and acknowledge it? What can we do to help folks?
I think a conversation's needed. The family needs to sit down and they need to bring up the topic, what's being experienced, what they're seeing, and they need to have a conversation about it. And they need to understand that it's not personal, that it is for real, but that, you know, there's certain things that they can do, empower them with some information, maybe pictures with the person, or talk about things past, or allow the loved one to have those moments of lapse and take advantage of when they don't, and not to feel like if the person becomes angry, that they're at fault, that this is the process of that disease and we just have to acknowledge it. So we do need to have that conversation about the disease of dementia and Alzheimer's.
And having those difficult conversations is terribly important. In keeping with having a difficult conversation, and also, Jean, coming from that place of, I'm going to be bringing the kids to the grandparents, and granddaddy's got memory impairment, and grandmom's hosting the dinner. You know, how do you do that? And one of the things that I really support and share with the clients that we work with is to have just that first internal conversation. Who are you doing this for? That you need to be very honest. Are you doing this for the senior, for the demented person, or are you doing it for yourself and for your children? And the answers vary depending on, you know, when you have that introspective look. If you're doing it for yourself, then you need to take a really good look at that. If you're doing it for your children, then what are the real lessons that you need to look at for your kids about caregiving and being compassionate and patient? If you're doing it for your loved one, that's the part we can really look at modifying, and that's kind of the direction I'd like to go for just a few minutes.
Terrific.
You know, we had talked in the last time about the holidays and bringing somebody to your home, or when do you not bring them home? When do you leave them in their assisted living or their personal care home or the nursing facility, whatever it is? And we talked about how well they could cope and what were the factors. So to take it a little bit further, then when you are considering how to incorporate the holidays, if they are safe and can tolerate coming to your home, then that's a fabulous thing. But a lot of folks don't know what to do if they can't bring them to their house. And how are we going to still have the holidays? How are we still going to do Thanksgiving, but I can't have mom home with me? She doesn't help, and I'm trying to prepare dinner, and she's walking around asking me the same question 50,000 times. I just can't do all of this. So we're going to let her stay at the assisted living this year, and we're going to see how that goes. So making the decision to do that is okay, and it is appropriate for that person. So you need to have acceptance that this is safe and appropriate for them. It's okay also to modify the holidays. There are so many rituals that we'll talk about new rituals, but rituals that we have in celebrating the holidays with the foods that we prepare, and certainly, watching football games or watching the parade for Thanksgiving. And then for the Christmas holidays or the Jewish holidays, there's certainly all of the food, there's greeting cards, there's gifts, gift wrapping, decorating, shopping. It's just, there's all of this stuff. Well, the person with dementia can't do all of those things. It's overwhelming. And then they become agitated and frustrated. So we want to think about bringing the essence of the holiday down to help them enjoy the things that they enjoyed. Brandy talked about that, I think, last time, about if they enjoyed something, they probably still could enjoy it. What can we do to modify it? So I try to tell folks, let's just talk about Thanksgiving. What is the one dish that embodies the spirit of Thanksgiving for that individual, that it wouldn't be Thanksgiving without ... You fill in the blank. Is it cranberry sauce? Is it pumpkin pie? Is it whatever it is? We have a tradition in America to eat way too much on Thanksgiving, and there's just starches galore and side dishes and all. So what's the one thing that your loved one will go, oh, maybe it's Thanksgiving because I am having this. So that's the thing you want to make sure they have, even if they're eating a hamburger, because that's what they serve, which is not what they'd serve. But, if it's something that's not very Thanksgiving, or you don't do it on Thanksgiving Day, which is okay, because these folks do not look at the calendar. So they won't know that it's the day before or the day after Thanksgiving. It's really all right. So when you go, that you bring them pumpkin pie, and then maybe they will start talking about other Thanksgivings. And oh my gosh, and my mother made the best pumpkin pie, and she used this recipe, and she handed it down. You don't know where that conversation is going to go, but those are the experiences that you're looking for, those pearls, those
That's right.
gems.
To help you with the grief and loss that you're feeling. Bring out as much joy as you can.
Absolutely. Overwhelming, you're not going to get it. Everyone's going to be frustrated, but if you can parcel it down to the essence of what is important to that person, then you can really enjoy the moment with them.
And we know...
I love it. And it might even be a hamburger, even though that's not traditional Thanksgiving food, and that's okay.
As I was listening to Lisa talk,
Chinese
my
food.
mouth is watering, and it's. But we have to recognize
Leave it
that
to the man in the room. We're talking to his heart here.
Yeah, but we got to recognize that these things cause us to respond. It gives us recall. Pumpkin pie, that's associated with Thanksgiving. I think of pumpkin pie. I think of Thanksgiving, and like she's saying, if we just bring up pumpkin pie, homemade pumpkin pie.
Right,
too,
just that. Well, it doesn't have to be. It could be Mrs. Smith. I'm sorry. Get it at Publix. But if you bring
I love
it...
all this, ladies, and all of you are so excited because this is your experience and your expertise. And I'm thrilled because we are talking about grief and loss, and that you actually go through that when you still have your loved one with you who is suffering with dementia. And these are wonderful tips to add joy to the season, to cut down on the chaos of the season, so that
having
you can
a plan.
still breathe, but also enjoy the season. But let's also talk about the physical loss of a loved one prior to, or if you're losing them during the holiday season, or could lose them during the holiday season, because nobody ever really knows when, God is going to take you. How do you help someone? And it could be the last holiday, or they maybe didn't get that last holiday. How do we help folks through those times with their immense grief and loss?
I think let's start with something that was just posed to me this morning. The whole piece where you said, what if the death could happen over the holiday season? One of the big things that we recommend as geriatric care managers is being proactive. And I think death is something that, just like the holidays, can bring sheer chaos if you're not aware and prepared. Especially if you're traveling with a loved one, that's very important to know. God forbid, if you were at Aunt Sally's in Boston and mom passes there, what do you do with that scenario? And I think just like, medically, you would have her physician's information, you would have her healthcare advance directive, you would have the hospital, you would have her copy of her insurance cards, you would have all that together. There are so many ways in dealing with the funeral process and the loss of a loved one that you can truly be proactive. One of the things we've created within our organization is a form, and it's basically a blank form that we use to gather all of the death certificate information beforehand, so that families aren't at the time of loss saying, now what was her mother's maiden name? What would she consider her occupation throughout her life? And this is stuff that, in the here and now, that could be very logical things to look up. But if you are 30 minutes after the death of a loved one, and a day later you're sitting in front of a funeral director trying to pull up information, and it's the day after Thanksgiving, this is a tough set of information to pull together. So having some of this stuff done, I spent a year working in a funeral home, and I'm a huge proactive voice in this area about pre-planning. And I think that's vitally important that you do have at least an idea of what your loved one would want, specifically a location for the funeral chosen, an actual funeral home chosen. And I always say it's best to go ahead while you are logical and make those plans beforehand, so that not only is it a logistical nightmare after the fact if you haven't done that, but also you can do a lot financially beforehand, so that the family is aware that if, God forbid this does happen over the holidays, that it is the least amount of chaos that you can endure.
Right, that's important. And then recognizing that the loved one is going to be sad during the holidays, and don't expect too much from them is very important. But how do you go about, maybe it's your dad. I lost my dad September 27th, so that was quite a bit of time prior to the holidays, but that first holiday season was difficult, and I had my mom for Christmas, and what we did is we had a little celebration, and I had given her a little angel first to open up the day to sort of get the elephant out of the room, and we had a good cry and talked about him with my kids and my mom present, and then we went on to the joyous celebration because we had, so to speak, gotten the sadness into the air to recognize him first.
Definitely.
Is that something you recommend?
Yes, very much. I think one of the big pieces, and we might talk about this further after the break, but is to create what I call a tangible or realistic space to grieve. This is a ritual that you can create. It actually can be very, very concrete. And the space can literally be a couch cushion on your couch where you go, and that is your place to break down, to scream, to cry, to experience that emotion. And especially in the days where there's other things going on, and especially in the days where you want to experience the other end of the spectrum, the joy, the happiness, the peace that comes through the holidays, giving like you did that moment to say, this sucks. We lost someone extremely important, and not to give Clint Eastwood any props, but recognizing that quote unquote empty chair that is now there, that wasn't before, I think is huge, because, a lot of people treat it like the elephant in the room. They don't go there, and they think if we don't talk about it, it'll be fine. And then they look around and notice that it's not. And, I am a firm believer, if you can face it head on and say, this is hard, and we are going to deal with this as a family, and we acknowledge, whether it be a special time, a candle that's lit. I even have a family that I spoke with that actually still did a place setting for the person at the table, which I thought was beautiful, just to acknowledge that that person was a part of this family, was a part of our unit, and was vastly important to us. And I think giving that boundary around it to say, this is our 30 minutes. We're going to take this 30 minutes.
Allow yourself to grieve, but allow yourself to have some joy too.
100%,
joy
yes.
in the day.
Yes.
That's hard for people who are grieving, but you know what? You deserve it as well. Well, we have so much more to talk about, but we do have to take a quick break. If you or a loved one are suffering with dementia and going through grief and loss during the holidays, and it might be important for you to reach out to a professional geriatric care manager. And you can contact Brandy or Lisa at Senior Care Options at 770-579-9177, or you can go to their website at www.seniorcareops.com. So stay with us. We have to take a quick break, but we're going to come back and talk about lots more ways to help you cope with your grief and loss during the holiday season and give you some tangible ideas on how we might even be able to make your new holiday tradition and celebrations beautiful and enjoyable. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Jean Pete, and I welcome you back to our show, Better Living. Better Living is brought to you by the Homestead Hope Foundation and is sponsored by Homestead Hospice, where commitment to education and premier hospice care helps patients and families through life's most important journey.
Thanks for staying with us as we talk about this very important topic of grief and loss during the holiday season. I'm Jean Pete, and again, we're still here with Lisa Meeks and Brandy Hackett, who are with Senior Care Options, a certified professional geriatric care management company, and I'm also still here with my co-host, Mike King, who's also a licensed master of social work. And we talked in the first half hour about grief and loss through the holidays. We talked about how living with a loved one with dementia is still a loss. Even though the physical person is still there, you're still grieving and you still have those feelings of loss during the holiday season. And Brandy and Lisa gave us some tips on how we can help ourselves as caregivers cope with that loss of the person we knew even before we lose the physical person, and how we can modify our holiday celebrations to help reduce as much stress as possible and lessen the amount of negative feelings through the holiday season and still have moments of joy. And then we also talked about the actual physical loss of a loved one and how that impacts our holiday season. And we just started to talk about how we can help folks, whether it's ourselves, our loved ones, our neighbors, our friends, who had either an imminent death, they just lost someone at this time of year, or they know they're going to be losing someone during the holidays or shortly thereafter. So as we head into the second half of the show, Brandy, Lisa, I'm going to throw this out to you again. Let's talk about what sense of loss and grief you're going through even before the loved one passes, when we know someone maybe is on hospice, or we know that this is going to be our last holiday season with this person, and we hope we have it, but even if we don't, how are we going to get through these holidays?
Well, I think it's important to think about what things you can still share and experience, being very present for the loved one who's passing, but also for the family, for your other loved ones, so that you were all really present for each other. Try not to feel overwhelmed during the holiday season that you have to do everything and grieve during all of this.
Right.
It's okay to take a break. I think it's important that there is no right or wrong way. This is a personal journey. So the way people handle their grieving process is highly individual, just like we all are, and that there's no right or wrong way. The only caveat there is we don't want people to become self-absorbed with that there's a time and a place, but then they're going to need to join the land of the living, if you will, and still be able to be a part of some of what is going on, even if it's not overblown for the holidays.
And that's important because I talk a lot about us respecting the caregiver. We've talked a lot in this show and in past shows about my feeling that it's just such a difficult role to be that caregiver, and sometimes people minimize what that person's going through. And so I often try to be so respectful of that caregiver and think of ways that we can help. And we've done the show on some gifts that we can give caregivers of loved ones with dementia. But I also, while this may sound harsh, the person that's going through the grief and loss, we want them and their feelings, or even ourselves, but we also have to recognize this is not just our day. This is a lot of people's days that we celebrate with every year. And so we need to respect the grief. We need to respect the sadness. We need to be open about it. But then we also need to give ourselves a break and make sure that we also see the joyous moments in the day and allow ourselves to smile. at those moments as well.
Well, and I think when you lose someone, sometimes you feel like because your life has to change so much that I'm not going to say it's over in a sense, but it feels done in a lot of ways. And one of the things that I did, I had a wonderful experience both being in and helping to lead. I know that's a little confusing, but I was in school, so they let me do both sides, but a beautiful bereavement group out of Athens. And one of the tasks that we did, a lot of which were concrete, because I think when we talk about the emotional expression of grief, it can be very tough to grab onto because it's really, it can vary by the second, much less by the day, by the experience, by what triggers it, etc. And some of the feelings can be more positive, which can be really confusing, such as relief. That can be a very positive experience that a caregiver can have, but it can also be, they can pass a lot of judgment on themselves for feeling anything positive. But one of the things that we did, which I think goes back to the whole acknowledging the role that you played and the part that that person played in your life, is we took a very, very simple white paper plate, and we told the families there, we said, 3-4 days, 3 weeks prior to the death, I want you to take this plate and I want you to divide it appropriately, like a pie, to all the things that you considered yourself. What was your identity at that time? So we would say things like, okay, were you a caregiver, a daughter, a wife, a mother, etc.? Were you a church member, a Sunday school teacher? Whatever things, when you were thinking through it, and we gave it as a homework assignment, so they had a little bit more time to think, but said, divide this plate. And, if you talk to anybody, they're not going to say, I have 8 equal pieces. And my 8 equal pieces are, I'm a mother 1/8 of the time. Right. And so what we found is a lot of the roles that the people played were those of caregiver or caregiver-like. And so the next session that we had, we did something that was, unfortunately, a really tough thing to do. We handed them a pair of scissors. And we said, with these scissors, I want you to cut out every part of that plate that with the death is no longer. And literally people sat there sobbing. And that, it's not our intent to just have them break down, but this gave them a very concrete view to how much had they changed, what's changed. But it also gave them, which I think is a much more beautiful thing, what's still the same. If you were a mother and your children are still with you and you're still able to serve in that role, you're still a mother. And it gave you the what's left as well as the what's gone. And it gave you that real visual so that you could look at it and say, okay, well, these are places that I might not have been as present in as I should have been. So maybe I can now make that a little more my identity. And you start retouching a lot of those. Or you might say, I've always wanted to learn how to quilt, or I've always wanted to learn how to clog. Why I thought of those two, I don't know. But, just things
and that's true.
That can be new identity.
It's so sad, but I love it that, you still are your own individual person, although you have had an immense loss. And, this can be about a death, or this can be about a divorce, or this can be about a child moving away to college. Who knows? Loss is loss, no matter what you're thinking about. But I love the idea that no matter how much of you is lost with the loss of that person, there's still some left, and you need to feed that part of yourself to keep going.
Exactly.
And that's a good place to start.
And I think that's an important thing to think about. I was doing a presentation earlier this week about this same topic, not the holidays, but the grieving. And people focus on the enormous role of being caregiver to the point that they lose other parts of themselves. And then if they've done it for a long time, they forget what else they wanted to do. So I wanted to give them permission and space to think about, what do you have time to do now? So I love the illusion, the illustration with the paper plate, and then the imagery of cutting away those pieces that you no longer have those roles necessarily. And yes, you could expand the other pieces to fill, but you can also, there's now a space, which is not a bad thing. You can put something new or something old or something
I
borrowed or
love
something
that.
blue. You can
Permission
put whatever you
and
want in that
space.
space.
So we are giving you all permission. To grieve and grieve the loss of your loved one.
But
And
then
we're
have a
also
next
giving
chapter.
You space to bring new things in.
Correct.
to
And that's
excite you to
very
move
important.
forward.
So many caregivers create a busyness so they don't have to feel what's going on, whether it be at the holiday time or just as the caregiving needs intensify, you become busier and busier, and then it takes up a lot of headspace so you don't have to feel things.
Yeah, Jeannie, within our society and our culture, I think we're duty driven. As a spouse, we have certain duties that we have to fulfill, certain roles that we feel. As a child, we're a son, we're a daughter. And at that occurrence of death, our duty is over. And that's where we're left with this duty. And I think if we can refocus our duties to ourselves and recognize there's a need that we have to take care of self, that it's okay to be selfish at this time, that it's okay to be me. That takes a lot of permission because their day-to-day role, even from marriage all the way to the death, or from birth to death, they've had that role to play. They don't have that role no more. And this is where loss comes in. This is where the grief comes in. And if we can help the individuals understand this purpose of duty in their life and how they need to redirect that duty to themselves, I think the loved ones will feel okay to say to myself, it was a burden to take care of my loved one. And I do feel relief, but now it's time that I need to move on, and I have done my duty.
And your loved one would want that for
Yes.
you, in many cases.
Absolutely. So let's bring it back to the holidays because we always run out of time. But regarding the holidays, so I have so many thoughts going through my head now on how to help a grieving person through the holidays, and one of those things is that space that needs to be filled. Gifts surrounded by who that person can become and what they love would seem to be, even though they may not be ready to receive it, to give it and stay in touch over the coming months could bring out, I'm just watching a flower open.
That's a nice illustration.
One
visual.
of the things, Jeannie, we got to guard against with loss is isolation. So any gift that we can give to promote them getting out and being part of, whether that be with like you said, manicures, massages, a day at the spa,
taking classes,
lunches, classes, quilting, something that just goes against that isolation. That isolation can become the biggest enemy there is to grief. And we just need to encourage them to get out and to re-engage and reintroduce themselves to other aspects of life.
Well, and I think, too, with the grief process, because it's so difficult to support someone that's grieving, specifically if it's tragic grief, you tiptoe. So in tiptoeing, a lot of people, when they do not know what to do, just clearly avoid it. And I think that that's a huge problem. And, yes, 100% there are things to say that are wrong. So I don't want to say there is no wrong way to support. Oh, yes, there are. And I've said in many a bereavement group where people were horribly damaged by some of the comments that were said to brush it off. This is a huge emotional experience that people are sharing, and when people write it off, it can be very tough. And when they try to belittle what they're feeling, or you should be over, or a lot of them, unfortunately, I've heard from religious parties, and I'm not going to point fingers, but the whole God now has another angel, or this was God's will, or ... To sit in a bereavement group and watch a mother who lost her 21-year-old son in a tragic car accident to say, I hate God. And this was a very religious person that had to come to peace with the fact that not only had she lost her beautiful son, she had lost her faith. And so for somebody to come in and say and try to give her support based on a faith that she hated was a very, very tough place for her. So I think that, I don't want to scare people off to say, if you don't know what to say, don't say anything. But on the flip end, if you don't know what to say, just be there. Be supportive, be at reach, offer those concrete pieces of help that, like we said, very specific. Tuesday, I am bringing you lasagna. Do you like it with meat or without meat? I mean, very specific ways to be supportive. But honestly, I mean, there are some wonderful ways to support, and there are some horribly tragic ways. And I think it's just like Lisa mentioned earlier, when you say things like that, are you saying that to make yourself feel better, or are you saying that to try to support them? And I think there's so many scripts that we utilize, just like if someone says, how are you? We answer fine. That's a script. That's something that we're taught in what we do.
Yeah, and so many people, this is just communication 101, but sometimes we talk too much and we don't listen enough. Mm-hmm. And I think that they will guide us. And I had a friend who lost an adult child, and it was difficult for many people to address it after a few months had gone by. And, just saying, how are you doing? You don't ever talk about her, but I can understand it must be hard, and I just want you to know I'm still thinking about you. Mm-hmm. Or when they're going through it, I cannot imagine, and I don't know what it's like, but I'm here, and I'm so sorry. Don't assume that they're ready for happiness. Oh, God has an angel, and it's a beautiful thing to many people. So you really have to listen to the person that's grieving, their cues. You don't mean it, but that can be taken poorly if they're in a bad place about it.
Well, and I think the most important thing is that we have this idea that you need to move on, move beyond. And what I've found in grief support is you really need to learn to move with, which is a very different concept than moving on, because that loss is still going to be there. And so when it triggers, because, I was talking in a group yesterday about, oddly enough, grief and loss. Lisa and I said this is our grief and loss week. And I said, my grandparents died back when I was around 10 years old. And one of the things that they loved was juicy fruit gum, which I know every listener, when I said that, knows exactly what that smells like. So if I get a whiff of juicy fruit gum, my mind automatically goes to them. And even though that loss is, I'm not going to reveal my age, but 20 years old, it still is painful, and it still hits, and I still miss them. And so my life didn't stop because they're gone, but they're still with me. And I think taking that grief and that experience and those emotions and moving with them as part of who you are now, as part of your new identity, is so vastly important.
Right. Excellent. So in terms of the holidays, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I do want to fit it in here. Recognizing the loss and adding new tradition. Let's talk a little bit about that. Who would like to take?
I would like to talk about that. I think that it is important. Again, we just talked about creating space. So creating new traditions. If the old tradition is painful or can't be done in the same manner, then find a new way to express that. For instance, perhaps there's a loss of, we'll just do empty nesting. So take the children have gone off to college. They're maybe not coming home for Thanksgiving for whatever reason. So instead of cooking in your house, because then you would feel lonely, perhaps you could go volunteer at a shelter and serve a meal to somebody who needs that, and then you can be fulfilled in that way. So finding new ways to support other people, volunteer, give of yourself, serve others, not in the literal sense of, serving them, but being in service of others is a great way to combat the isolation and the depression, because then you're not self-absorbed. It's all about me. Whoa, you are then helping others, and there's a lot of power and healing in doing that. So starting a new tradition, or incorporating volunteering into your holiday experience could be very powerful.
Absolutely, and when you give, you get back so much more.
Yes.
I love that idea. So let's talk now too. Okay, we say we go to our mother and fathers every Christmas Eve, and we have a Christmas Eve celebration so that we can be home with our children Christmas Day. I think that this happens a lot. So Christmas Eve is a very traditional celebration at somebody's house, and whether it be the sister or the mother, and that is where the loss has occurred. So do you, if you're the wife left behind, you still want people Christmas Eve because you want to be surrounded by folks. You don't think you can bear it without them. So let's say people are coming. What can they do to make that Christmas Eve celebration still a joyous occasion? Or maybe the family comes or someone comes earlier. I don't know. Lisa, Brandy?
I think that some of the things, just to reiterate some of the things that we talked about, is by looking head on at the loss. Don't pretend it's not there, because then everybody's going to tiptoe and just feel uncomfortable. Go ahead and give yourself permission. Maybe you want to light a candle or say some sort of blessing or prayer, or just something kind about the person that you're missing and why you're missing them, but keep it brief.
Or maybe it might even be, I'm just thinking out loud here, but if you have grandchildren and the grandchildren are having a hard time as well, it may help you to have some kind of a balloon ceremony before dinner, and
absolutely.
then that's a wonderful new tradition that
Correct.
you didn't have, and you can honor grandma or grandpa, and then have that sadness, and then sit down to eat.
And I think, too, with something that you mentioned, and I've seen a lot of people avoiding working with children through grief. And I think it's just vitally important that children of any age experience loss. And there are very appropriate ways to work with that. And there are wonderful books out. I know a lot of hospice professionals can give advice on how to work with children in grief. A lot of counselors can do the same. Again, don't tiptoe around it. They're grieving. It's an obvious loss of person, and this loss might be a lot more obvious to them than even someone with dementia losing things as they're going along. But I think it's just vitally important to recognize that the entire family, as a unit, has experienced a loss, and even though they are not expressing the same way, I think it's important to respect how they choose to express, but also making sure that it is acknowledged across the lifespan.
I think, Jeannie,
And see, children, I'm sorry, go ahead, Michael.
I think the loss in holidays and when the person's not present, what we're left with is memories. And I think we just need to acknowledge that within the whole family. It's just not my memory, but it's a memory each of us had of this individual. And to set that time aside in remembering that person, but to give it a time period, but move on to enjoy the present. And I think if these little exercises on all triggers of loss, such as birth dates and wedding dates and whatever, Christmas, just set that time aside in the recent loss to remember and allow others to remember, but recognize that it is a memory and now we're creating new memories.
Absolutely. And then just one other thing I do want to talk about before we have to end this show, and that is if you have somebody who's very sick through the holiday season, something to think about is celebrate the holidays before the holiday. Who cares that it maybe isn't December 25th or actual Thanksgiving Day? Give yourself the gift of that holiday and those memories, no matter what that day is. Lisa, Brandy, thank you so much again for joining us. Very important information for our audiences to hear. I always enjoy having your expertise on the show. Michael, thank you for co-hosting. And if you want to get in touch with Brandy or Lisa at Senior Care Options, you can contact them at 770-579-9177. If you are experiencing grief or loss during this holiday season, I hope some of these tips will help you. Remember, we are giving you permission and space, not just to grieve the loss of your loved one, but also to enjoy the joyous moments as well.
I'm Jeannie Pete. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day and week ahead, and listen here same time next week and every week. Homestead Hope Foundation is your resource for a healthy life. God bless.